Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the EIB Group's annual press conference announcing results for 2018. Thank you very much for coming, for your interest. On the podium, joined by President Werner Hoyer, Secretary General Mario Santoni, the Chief Executive of the European Investment Fund, Pier-Luigi, and the Director General of Operations of the EIB, Jean-Christophe Lalou. There will be a presentation by President Hoyer, after which we'll go into questions and answers. President, thank you.
Good morning, these dynamics. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank you very much for joining us. I'm proud to present to you the annual results of the European Investment Bank Group, the EIB EU Bank, for 2018. Despite the difficult environment in which we operated, the EIB Group has emerged stronger, delivering new instruments that will provide prosperity to European citizens for decades to come. In particular, we have increased our focus on two of the defining challenges of our times: closing the innovation gap and climate action. Our support to both as a share of our total activity is at the highest level ever. The results which I will outline today speak to the power of the EU and European collective efforts. They reflect Europe's ability to deliver at a time when parochial nationalism is unfortunately the preferred language of too many. Our mission is to invest in Europe's future. And on this basis, we do not only support future jobs and growth, but also European values and the European project. Our investments bring Europeans closer. In 2018, ladies and gentlemen, the year of our 60th anniversary, the bank provided more than 64 billion euros of financing. A conservative assessment shows that this financing supported 230 billion euros of total investment. That is close to the level of 2017, but with less financing. So the really important issue is the impact we got out of the individual euro is higher than ever. Every euro we provided supported more total investment than ever before. And that reflects the fact that EIB, the EU Bank, isn't crowding in institution. We work to make sure Europe benefits more from total investment, not just from us, but principally from others, commercial banks, private and public investors. We want our money to be smart money and deliver impact where it is needed most. We want to find new clients and invest in high-value projects. From this perspective, we have had a very good year indeed. In 2018, almost two-thirds of our operations were with new clients, two-thirds, making our financing available to an unprecedented spectrum of companies. We signed 854 projects and increased our capacity to deal with a larger number of smaller projects. That was expected from our shareholders and from our stakeholders. We delivered. Digitalization, SMEs, education and skills, sustainable energy supply, and the modernization of infrastructure, these are key enablers for the European economy to keep pace with global competition. We need to drive innovation to ensure that Europe remains competitive in the future. And there I'm really concerned. It's a serious issue. This is a vital part of our work. In 2018, we provided 13.5 billion euros to help keep Europe at the innovation frontier. And we did this while supporting cohesion and conversion regions. Indeed, close to 32% of the bank's financing in Europe went to cohesion and convergence regions, which is above our target of 30%. And explicitly, we do not see a contradiction between work on cohesion and work on innovation. It must be brought together. SMEs and mid-cap support remains an important policy objective of the EIB Group. In 2018, we provided over 23 billion euros to the sector. This financing will benefit over 370,000 companies in Europe. I'm happy to report that this year financing from the European Investment Fund in support of SMEs rose to above 10 billion euros for the very first time. We estimate this will mobilize an impressive 78 billion euros of finance in startups and other small and medium-sized companies and mid-caps. In addition, we have invested directly in dozens of startups and growth stage companies. These companies focus on deep tech innovation and cutting-edge technologies. These included truly inspiring companies, one developing an artificial heart, another developing innovative nanoparticles which improve the efficiency of radiotherapy in the fight against cancer. I could go on and go on with examples like this. In addition to providing finance, we have also offered independent technical and financial advice on 530 cases to get their products off the ground. Advisory assistance is as important as anything else we do because it helps make projects viable and ultimately get projects off the ground. We always move in the triangle between lending, which is normal for a bank, blending, that reflects our position in the family of the European institutions, and advising. Lending, blending, and advising must go together. I'm also proud that we managed to increase the proportion of our lending that goes towards combating climate change. Indeed, close to 30% of the bank's lending went towards climate change mitigation and adaptation in 2018. In support, and I say in resolved support, of the Paris Climate Accord, we are in course to meeting our commitment to provide $100 billion of climate finance from 2016 to 2020. Moreover, we are making good progress towards increasing our climate action financing to 35% of our total investment in developing countries by the end of 2020. EIB's commitment to climate action will remain unwavering. In addition, the EIB has also just started an energy lending review to adapt its policy to a changing environment. A 3-month public consultation with industry, civil society groups, and policymakers is underway. Ladies and gentlemen, on the 18th of July of last year, we celebrated the completion of our pledge to deliver over 315 billion euro of additional investment through European Fund for Strategic Investment, the Juncker Plan. In fact, by this date, we had surpassed this goal, providing support of investments mobilizing 335 billion euros. The success of EFSI led to its extension, the so-called EFSI 2.0, and our pledge to reach a new target of 500 billion by the end of 2020. With more than 375 billion euros of investment supported by the end of last year, we are already 75% of the way towards reaching this new target. We will deliver again. The European Court of Auditors has recently conducted an audit of FC1. A number of the concerns raised in the audit have already been addressed in the new regulation. This includes the technicalities of calculating investment mobilized. We're taking that very seriously, what the court says on these issues. What I find particularly encouraging from the audit was that 2/3 of businesses financed through EFSI were publicly willing to admit that the ECA that without EFSI support they would have had difficulty implementing their project. This is a testament to the success of EFSI as an instrument. It has been an extremely courageous decision by President Juncker a few years ago to support the idea of shifting money in the budget from subsidies and grants to guarantees and loans, and to embark on a more creative use of financial instruments in a responsible manner. Since many policy objectives we have in the European Union, and also outside, think of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, we have to be aware that reaching these objectives without financial instruments will be completely impossible. All the taxpayers' money in the world will never be enough to allow us to reach the SDGs. And therefore, we need to crowd in the private sector, and therefore we need the instruments to mobilize private sector funding for these purposes, and we have been very successful in that. EFSI or the Juncker plan, which is not only EFSI, but also the advisory capacity in the advisory hub, and also the regulatory environment changes that Vice President Timmermans has put on his agenda. This has all changed the DNA of the bank. It has multiplied our ability to take calculated risks and focus on financing gaps in Europe's economy, shifting from financing the recovery during the crisis to strengthening our economy's competitiveness. Ladies and gentlemen, in preparing the next multi-annual financial framework, we are keen to build upon this success. InvestEU, from our perspective, from the perspective of investment and growth, is about transforming FC into a long-term, robust, and financially sustainable tool to support EU policy delivery, notably in those key areas of innovation, climate, and cohesion I mentioned a minute ago. To achieve that, we need to maintain what worked well in FC, such as who does what in terms of policy steer versus banking and development. And in this respect, I fully support the concept of an integrated partnership between the EU Bank and the European Commission. And we are on the way there to this partnership together with our colleagues in the European Commission. And I believe this letter and spirit of the partnership between EC and EU Bank should also be pursued once we embark on the negotiations on the activities outside the European Union in strengthening Europe's role in the world, all the way from economic diplomacy to development policies. The EIB is a very good deal for the EU. We put money to work, not taxpayers' money, that's important, but money we raise from investors on the capital markets. Member states own the EIB, but they are not the principal source of funding. Indeed, in our 60 years, member states have ever only paid directly 14 billion euros in cash to secure the equity share of the bank, plus 3.5 billion into the reserves, 17.4 together. This has enabled us over the past 60 years to disperse more than 1.1 trillion euro, mobilizing up to 3 trillion euro of overall investment in support of EU policy, both inside and outside the European Union. And we developed the tools. 11 years ago, the EIB Group issued the first green bonds. At that time, it was considered lunatic to do so. But once people saw that this flies very well on the markets, there was a demand for these bonds. All of a sudden, it became a big success. And nowadays, the market has broken $500 billion mark globally. We played a major role in launching and setting the standards for these markets. Last year, we did it again. After long discussions also with the Secretary General of the United Nations, we issued the first sustainability awareness bond. Small one, pilot. It raised 500 million euros to help finance our contribution to meeting the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. Our initial focus was on the water sector. This year, we plan to issue sustainability bonds to fund other SDGs like healthcare or education. We believe that it will be a success again, that the sources to be tapped are there on the markets. We hope that other MDBs and financial institutions will follow and help us develop this market further, because it is key that we arrive at common standards and definitions for what is sustainable, what is helping the water sector, what is green. You don't take simply a piece of paper painted green and say this is a green bond. You have to have a taxonomy in order to make sure that those who invest into these bonds can rely upon it. There must be transparency, there must be possibility to respond and to prove. There must be accountability. Indeed, public resources will never suffice to meet our climate and sustainable development goals. We need to further mobilize private finance, and we need innovative approaches like these to turn our targets into reality, and that means we need to speak the language of those whose money we want to reach. Ladies and gentlemen, with the public or political uncertainties facing us right now, it would be easy to become inward-looking. It would also be a profound mistake. I've just returned from Davos this weekend, where there was one very clear message. We need to defend multilateralism and not let the world drift apart. We must realize that the big issues of our time cannot be solved in isolation. The international community is calling for global solutions to global problems, and as the EU Bank, it is our duty to help bring solutions to the table. This, for instance, is the case for the Clean Oceans Initiative, which we have launched together with our partners from KfW, the German National Promotional Bank, and Agence France de Développement, the French Development Agency. Currently, it involves only the commitment of 2 billion euros over 5 years. And I'm sure this is going to grow exponentially very, very soon, because this is one of the biggest challenges for the community of the world for the next decades. We want to be in the avant-garde in addressing this issue of clean oceans. EIB is a global bank. For this reason, last year, EIB invested over 8 billion euros outside the EU, roughly 12.5% of our total financing. Of this, we provided a record sum of 1.6 billion euros in sub-Saharan Africa, concretely helping to create jobs and improve living conditions on the continent. We stand ready to do more. We stand ready to help bundle EU resources and increase EU visibility outside the EU. And we stand ready to help establish an EU development finance architecture that is fit for purpose, one that helps Europe to finally start to punch above, or at least in line with its weight as the largest global provider of development assistance. Presently, we are fighting under par as Europeans. Ladies and gentlemen, like all EU institutions and bodies, EIB has to come to terms with Brexit. The departure of a major member of the EIB could have led to a weakening of the group's own funds and a considerable reduction in our lending capacity. Our board of directors has agreed measures to sustain and strengthen the bank's capital base after Brexit. These measures reflect the strong support by EIB shareholders for the EU Bank and their commitment not to let the departure of one member state weaken the EIB Group's mission and performance. We are in this fortunate situation that we did not have to ask for a cash injection. The cash portion of the capital replacement is to be financed from the reserves we have accumulated, reflecting the strength of the EIB's financial model. The member states will replace the callable capital in proportion to their capital share. And that is a very good news to the markets. In a strong show of confidence in the EU Bank, 2 member countries have additionally decided to increase their share in the bank to better reflect their weight in the EU economy. So it's a very good sign that member states of the European Union are ready to pay cash into the bank because they believe they should strengthen the institution. Let me conclude by making a few comments about the year ahead. When we asked firms about their longer-term outlook in our annual investment report, we detected significant anxieties. When I look ahead, I have to concur that this year promises its share of turbulence. Signs of an economic slowdown have intensified in the past couple of months. European parliamentary elections are sure to broaden the debate about the continent's direction. Blame Brussels, blame the EU has become the order of the day in too many parts of the continent. As president of a treaty-based EU institution, I take this adverse narrative very seriously. To ready the EIB for the future, we will continue evolving and demonstrating impact. We will continue investing in sound, sustainable projects in line with EU policy inside and outside the Union. And we will continue to be the good news institution of the European Union at a time of much negativity around EU institutions. I am very grateful to EIB staff and EIF staff for their commitment. Thank you all. I remain convinced that we are more than the sum of our national interests. We must remind ourselves of the ability of the European project to transform the lives of EU citizens. We must channel the power of a single, unified European market to strengthen EU competitiveness and EU cohesion. And we must Europeanize our thinking. Against the uncertain backdrop of 2019, I assure you that the EU Bank will continue to remain true to its mission to invest in Europe's future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. We're now going to open to questions. As a rule of thumb, we think that questions about individual projects in individual countries that are not of general interest are best saved for later. Vice President Navarro, Vice President Fayol, and Vice President Stubb are also in the room, as well as many senior colleagues. So there will be opportunity after the formal press conference to ask questions. So please identify yourselves when you ask, and let's start there, and then left to right, and then back.
Thank you, Christopher Strzemka, Polish Press Agency. Mr. President, we have seen on the one of the first chart you have shown us group result. It's been decreasing since 2016. Could you explain us in 2 words this trend? Thank you.
That is very easy to do, because it was obvious that during financial crisis, the bank was expected to, let's put it in macroeconomic terms, to turn counter-cyclical. And at that time, we strongly increased our lending capacity, also with big projects around the European Union. The more we overcame the financial crisis, which is not completely ended, but it has been considerably reduced, we have turned structural again, addressing the structural weaknesses of the European Union, and that meant turning to riskier, smaller, and more innovative projects. So that shows that with less money, we produced a bigger multiplier for this money. You could see that on one of the first charts. Maybe we can get this back, where you see the relationship between the light blue column for 2018 and the dark blue column in 2018. That relationship, that ratio has changed. The multiplier has become much bigger. So out of the individual euro, we got more. The Americans would have said we got more for the buck. And this is the idea. We are not volume crazy. We are impact crazy. We want to achieve something. And from that point of view, you need not look at the absolute figure combined there. Look at the ratio between the two, and you see the impact orientation of the bank. And there we have been better than before.
Hi, hello, Jean Comte from the French website Context. One question about the Juncker Plan on the European Court of Auditor report. So when the Juncker Plan was launched, the idea was to finance projects that didn't find any source of financing in the market. So the idea was to have new investments that couldn't get any support anywhere else. But the ECA report shows that most of the people who actually got support from the Juncker Plan said they could have gotten support somewhere else. So isn't that a big problem for the Juncker Plan? Thanks.
It would be indeed if that would be the case, but it's not the case. The fact is that I think there is a certain discrepancy between the Court of Auditors report and the description coming from whomever I know on this report, because the court says that the European Union and the EU Bank have reached the objectives, triggering jobs and investment at a volume that had been defined before. 100 million euros of investment triggered per employee of the bank. You have to take that, of course with a pinch of salt, but as a serious figure. If you take the additional lending and production produced by FC, you arrive at a relationship of 100 million euros per employee of the EU Bank. Maybe some of it could have been done through other programs, but no way near this scale and volume and maturity. And if you ask the clients about this, you get sometimes enthusiastic answers on the positive side, and you see some that believe, after they have been on the knees to get our loans for a long time and have received the loans afterwards, they say, of course, we could have done it ourselves, which in some cases I would doubt. In particular, when it comes to the length of the duration of the loan. There we are unique with FC. So the combination of long tenors and high-risk projects would not have been possible for such a volume. I know individual projects, maybe you would have squeezed the commercial banks to do a little bit more, even at a higher cost, but not this kind of overall volume. So look at the portfolio and not let yourself be misguided by individual projects. And of course, and I know it from personal experience when I try to see projects, you definitely have an underreporting by firms who do not report the importance of FC, because not everybody who has a great idea, developed a great project, a product, has been at the end of the day successful in the market with our support, and now is in the growth phase of its institution, will say, okay, I must admit at the beginning I was so weak, I needed this kind of support. But these cases are there. And I believe when it comes to these kind of startups and companies, innovative companies reaching the growth phase, FC also in the future will be urgently needed. Now there are so many pieces of the quarter audit reports which have been transformed into reality already in the move from FC 1.0 to 2.0. We have taken up many suggestions there that has been very valuable. Our exchange with the Court of Auditors is excellent, and we take critical remarks very, very seriously, but also we are delighted about the overall positive attitude that the Court of Auditors is taking. This cannot be taken for granted or cannot be easily expected, because one thing is quite sure. The use of financial instruments is not popular everywhere. Some people have a general mistrust vis-à-vis financial instruments. But as I said 2 times in my introduction, we will need well-structured, responsibly structured financial instruments in the future in order to reach our public policy goals. And therefore, I feel encouraged by the report of the Court of Auditors, and I take it as a helpful suggestion that some proposals are in that report, which we will follow up.
Question there.
Hi, hello, Erika Stuller from RTV Slovenia. I have a specific question about Slovene project. I don't know whether you want me to ask it now or spare it for later.
Divica Koper, to be quite direct. Of course, we have it on screen all the time. I'm aware that it's a strategically important project for Slovenia, but also for the hinterland of Slovenia. It is a technically very, very ambitious project. We are in very close contact with the government. I talked to the Prime Minister last week in Davos and the Finance Minister last week also in Brussels. So we are following very closely. Our teams, our technical teams, are sitting together this week. Again, I hope that we will come to a common solution.
And I think we could, if it's still about that project, maybe we can have a conversation after the formal press conference with some of the colleagues, if that's okay.
Thomas Gardner, Power News from Germany. You just said that growth is weakening again. Does this mean that your lending practice is going to change again? I mean, to bigger projects, less innovative, and so on?
I don't want to dramatize the situation. I see that we have a reduction in the expected growth rates for most EU countries in the next year, but I would not dramatize that too much. I think it's a wake-up call, but not a situation that requires drastic action. What it requires is a closer look not at the possibility of a cyclical downturn, which I hope can be avoided, but at the necessity to strengthen the European economy where we have developed weaknesses. We need to see that we have important parts of our economy which are still world champions. But we cannot take it for granted that this position on the markets will be there forever if we don't fight for it. We are in a situation where in some big areas, we are already trailing far behind. Look at artificial intelligence or the digitalization. It is dramatic in my view. But that also means that we have to take the consequence of the fact that for 15 years in a row, we Europeans have invested annually 1.5% of our GDP less into research, development, innovation, and education than our main competitors in Asia and in North America. it would be pretty funny to believe that this does not have an effect on our competitiveness. And therefore, the risk of a cyclical downturn is one thing, but what is even more important is that we address it also by strengthening us structurally. So my request, my call on the political leaders is to give more attention to strengthening the basis for our innovative development and research activities. And by the way, in many countries of the European Union, it begins with elementary school or even the kindergarten. So education must be more in the focus of our financing.
Good morning. My name is Paula. I'm from Political Europe. I have a question related to your energy lending policy, which is currently out for consultation. You mentioned how climate and climate change is one of the focus of EIB. In your draft energy lending policy, you highlight that in some regions there is a risk of stranded assets from investing in gas projects. And I wanted to know which reasons are those and how does it tally with the EIB lending policy currently and the fact that there are about 50 or more PCI projects on gas.
Thank you very much. The EIB is not the policy setter. However, we follow a policy. The EIB, the European Union has multiple policy objectives, including energy security, energy efficiency, and tackling climate change. This needs to be brought into balance also by the institution that is the key financier. So this is why we have launched a public consultation of our 2013 energy lending criteria. We welcome your feedback, and we would like to point out that our lending is source neutral but impact oriented, or output oriented for that matter, because we look at the emissions. And that is going to guide us through the consultations also when we discuss this issue in the next month with you. On the concrete issue of the risk of stranded assets in the gas sector, I would like to pass on to our Director General for Operations, who is sitting here on the board, who is very familiar with that issue. Jean-Christophe Laloux.
Thank you, President. Indeed, when we look at gas assets, this risk exists, and it is a risk that we have to take into particular consideration. We know that the demand for gas and the supply for gas is a particular concern. We hear very often in our public consultations, indeed, that particular theme on gas. When we finance individual projects, we make sure that indeed we pick the assets that do not present a risk of being stranded, in a risk which is unmitigated. We are going to continue to look at this issue particularly, and I please invite you also to liaise in particular with Chris Hurst, our colleague who is in charge in the project directorate who is actually supervising the energy lending policy review at the moment. As the President mentioned, for as long as the European Union is convinced, as we are, that gas is part of the transition towards a greener source of energy overall, and that we will not be able to do without a fairly long period where gas still will play a role in the transition, EIB will still be positioned on that particular segment. And we will indeed be more and more picky as time goes into choosing the right assets that present the lower risk of being stranded in the individual projects that we finance, such as what we recently did with the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline and the TANAP projects in Turkey and Italy. Thank you.
I would like to announce that we also have our chief engineer here, so to speak, the Director General for Projects, Chris Hurst. So if there are also follow-up questions on the energy sources and so forth, he would be available. So we can also open the floor to him.
Question here, and then back
Thank you very much, Lily Bayer, also from Political Europe, but on a bit of a different note. Going back to the Court of Auditors report that was published today, a part of their concern was that the geographic concentration of FC-signed financing operations was not sufficiently balanced, mostly ending up in a few larger EU 15 member states. So I was wondering, looking ahead to Invest EU starting in 2021, what, if anything, are you planning to do differently to ensure that investments go to smaller states? Because a part of the critique, I think, was that member states with more active national promotional banks seem to be doing better at accessing financing than those smaller states that don't really have those institutions. Thank you.
We do not intend to change anything, because we would therewith confirm the prejudices that are being multiplied again and again and again, and which are complete nonsense. May I read out the geographical distribution of EIB financing? First for EIB lending in general, and then for FC project in particular. The top 5, and I mean, you must admit that it makes sense to put it by GDP and not compare Malta with Germany. Wouldn't be really fair. But if you do it by GDP, the top 5 countries in EIB financing in general are Greece, Cyprus, Portugal, Croatia, and Poland. I think that pretty much fits with the necessities in Europe. If you look at FC, the top ones are again the Greeks. Greece is by far the biggest one. Then Estonia, Portugal, Spain, and Lithuania. If you look at the bigger countries in general, you will find that indeed Spain and Italy are pretty far in the upper half, and that makes sense. There is a problem in Italy, which we know, and there was a problem in Spain, which the Spaniards have solved pretty well, and we are proud of having been helpful. So I believe we must remove this constant nonsense about the distribution of our projects. There is one myth that might support this idea, and that's the idea that geographical distribution is fair only if it is precisely even by each and every member state in terms of a quota. Quota thinking is unknown to the bank. And if at the end of the day, country X is envious of country B, the neighbor, having 1/10 of a percentage point more in financing than you have yourself, then we are on the wrong track. So I believe that we have made considerable progress with the geographical distribution of our lending. The whole myth stems from a time after 1 year of FC, when indeed, and there you have a point, some bigger countries with strong national promotional banks were faster in taking advantage of the possibilities offered by FC. But these times are 3 years over. And therefore, I simply don't buy it anymore. Which, the first year? It was 16.
Hello, Francisco Garascio, Reuters. 2 little questions. The first is about your next year's plan. This year actually. We see that you cut your financing by 20% last year. That's because of the fact that the crisis is over. Do you expect your financing in 2019 to remain at around 64 billion, to go up, to go down? First. Second question is about the shareholding. You said that 2 countries, Poland and Romania, want to increase their shares in the bank, but we understand that other countries don't want that, and the issue is not solved and needs to be solved by Brexit Day, which is in March. So what do you think can happen? How do you think to solve this issue? How do you think this issue can be solved? And what happens if it's not solved by Brexit Day? Thanks.
Well, these are basically two questions. On the figures, you are right. We are talking about the 63 billion plus minus that will be done this year. But the other question is practically circling around Brexit. And on Brexit, you are in a rather strange situation that we don't know when and how Brexit will take place. And we cannot answer the question that others on the other side of the channel will have to respond to. The fact is, however, that the member states, the 27 member states, have expressed their willingness to replace the British callable capital, and they have accepted the extraordinary capital injection coming from Poland and Romania. And this is good news, because these countries show their support for the bank in an extraordinary manner, and they show also how important EIB is for their economic development. So we are very grateful for these moves. Implementation is, so to speak, in limbo, because we do not know whether and when Brexit will take place. But we are ready, and I'm confident that the necessary decisions by the member states, sometimes parliamentary decisions, will be done by the time of Brexit. Follow up?
Yeah, first is about the first question you didn't answer. What's your plan? What's your forecast in terms of financing for 2019? Will stay around the 64 billion, will go up, will go down? And then on the second, I understand then that the issue with Romania and Poland has been solved. This means that the shareholding, so also the voting rights, the power of Poland and Romania will increase within the board in relation to their increased shares.
Well,
thanks.
Of course, whether and when it will take place is a function of of Brexit taking place or not, and when. So what gets into effect will depend upon the further negotiations of the European Union of the 27 with the United Kingdom. And we hope that we will learn more. Maybe after today we know already a little bit more when it comes to discussions in the House of Commons, whether the House of Commons takes things into its hands more or whatever happens. We need to wait. But we are prepared, and also when it comes to the increase of the shares of these two countries, which, however, is not as dramatic as was targeted at the beginning. I mean, we are talking about relatively modest increases of the direct contribution of these two countries, and potentially also of Luxembourg. But this will be seen when we know whether everything that has been negotiated in the context of Brexit will go into effect, or whether there will be a delay or Brexit will be cancelled. So I would like to give you the final response to your question, but unfortunately this is not in my hands. I would know what to do, but that is irrelevant. 63, plus minus. We always have a margin of maneuver.
Good morning, Mr. Hoyer. Beda Romano, Sole 24 Ore. You mentioned Brexit just now. What impact a hard Brexit would have on the bank, and especially on the bonds of the bank?
On the
bonds. Do you have a scenario for that possibility? Thank you very much.
Well, so far our position on the markets has not been affected by the foreseeable exit of the United Kingdom, and that is due to the fact that the shareholders have made it crystal clear that they do not want to see the EU bank harmed by the decision of one member state to leave the Union, and therefore the readiness to take over the callable capital by the United Kingdom has been expressed, and I think it will come into place if Brexit takes place. In addition to that, we were able, because we are a very successful bank, so over the last 60 years we have accumulated reserves which allow us to replace the British paid-in capital by conversion of reserves into paid-in capital. So that flank has been closed as well. Beyond that, Brexit is terrible. And it's particularly terrible also for us. I mean, not as terrible as it is for the British citizens, but it is terrible. We lose a member of the bank. By the way, the statutes talk about members, not shareholders. Members of the bank, who owns 16%, a little bit more of the bank. That's a lot. and that is a huge contributor to our activities. That, for me, is even more important. The United Kingdom is, until this very day, and until the last day of its membership in EIB and the EU, a strong contributor to our activities. In particular, when it comes to innovative solutions, when it comes to research and technology, when it comes to intelligent and advanced infrastructure, when it comes to development policies, where DFID was one of our main partners. And of course, we regret that heavily, and we will miss the UK, and we await what kind of relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom will be developed in the future. The United Kingdom loses with us an important partner, because other than most member states of the European Union, in particular the big ones, the United Kingdom does not have a big national promotional bank like CDC en France, or GDP in Italy, or KfW in Germany, or ICO in Spain, or BGK in Poland. Something like this, with this firepower these institutions have, does not exist in the United Kingdom, and therefore it will be a burden on the UK economy as well. So basically, we are running with open eyes into a lose-lose situation.
Follow-up, yeah.
What you said applies also for a hard Brexit, so you don't see any impact on bonds from a hard Brexit.
On the bonds, I don't see that impact. On everything else, I see it, because it's hard Brexit, no deal Brexit means chaos. And that will have an impact on all our activities.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Jerome Hughes, freelance. I have a quick question. There was some reporting some time back that the European Commission had requested that the EIB excuse me, get involved in efforts to try and save the Iran nuclear deal. And then I think there was some reporting that perhaps it might upset investments in the United States and so on because of pressure from Washington. Anything to say on this? What happened, or is there any chance the EIB will get involved in those efforts in the future?
Well, it's absolutely a no-brainer for all public banks in Europe, because we must say that, in view of the fact that also I come with a foreign affairs background, as you might know, I admire the deal that has been struck by the Europeans and the Iranians at that time. I think it has been an excellent piece of diplomatic work, and I regret seeing it cancelled. So from that point of view, I perfectly can understand the efforts of those in the European Commission or in Council or in the Member States to say we have to find a replacement for that. And that means also a financial institution that can take care of it. But an institution that is indebted with $500 billion of euros on the international capital markets, of which 40% is denominated in dollars, will under the US sanctions regime not be able to pay our interest on these bonds anymore. And that means you go into default. It is not just a question of you might get into trouble, you go into default. And therefore, it would be completely irresponsible. And therefore, the European Union, whose position I can perfectly understand on the Iran deal, will need to come up with a more creative solution than exposing one of the big public institutions like EIB or any of the national promotional banks into jeopardy.
Hello, Irina Kostaki for New Europe. As it is the case for Greece, and I don't know in which other member states you have dedicated investment teams like country offices, and how do you assess their work throughout this last year?
It's crystal clear that since the beginning of the financial crisis, or even before that, Greece has always been in a specific focus of the bank. We have been very active there before the crisis. We have been the ones staying during the crisis, and we have kept and even increased our activities after the crisis. And we are proud of the contribution that we have brought about for the stabilization of the Greek economy. The challenges were enormous, and they are still enormous, and therefore we have taken a pilot project approach to our work in Greece by giving up our highly centralized method of working. Out of the 3,500 employees of the bank, more than 3,200 are in Luxembourg. So we are very thinly represented around the world. We are not even, sometimes that's critical, represented in each individual member state. Not to talk about the more than 100 countries around the world where we are operating. So this is a critical point, our presence on the ground. In Greece, we have gone a different way. In Greece, we have set up a dedicated investment team for Greece because we found it necessary to move closer to the individual client in Greece and not, so to speak, have contacts at a distance out of Luxembourg, mainly with the public sector and some big private promoters. So therefore, our experience with our team in Athens, which is of course closely linked to the Greek division in Luxembourg, was very positive. We are happy with it. And we'll keep it, that's for sure.
Bonjour, Mathieu Bion pour l'Agence Europe. Une question de nouveau sur EFSI. Le rapport de la Cour des comptes aussi conteste l'effet de levier, de multiplier effect. Il dit que c'est simplement surestimé parce que les opérations financières ne sont pas suffisamment avancées pour justement pouvoir en évaluer l'impact. Donc je voulais savoir comment vous commentez cette disposition.
Thank you very much. That is again the discussion we have with the court auditor methodology. That is an ongoing project and probably one that will never be really satisfactorily serviced. But we have looked into this very, very, very closely because that's, additionality and the multiplier. This is the center of our focus, and therefore we take that very seriously. And I've asked both the operators in the bank and in the European Investment Fund to respond to that question, and I pass therefore on first to Monsieur Gilibert and then potentially to Mr. Lalou again.
Thank you, President. In large part, this is a very technical and complicated discussion, and we have developed a methodology that has been partly contested, and there's a recommendation in the ACA report to revise this methodology. This methodology has been already revised, has been approved, and will go into operation soon under the so-called FC2. But essentially concern the fact that there's some double counting of operation between EIB and the EIF, so we have now taken this into account, and so going forward, we should implement a methodology that is fully in line with the European Court of Auditors recommendations.
Okay.
Any more questions? If that is not the case, I would like to thank you very much for attending today. If there are follow-up questions about individual projects or aspects of the EIB's operation, please stay behind and talk to our colleagues and experts. Thank you very much for your interest. Have a great rest of the day.